right-of-way, but may. And again, that intent is so that they could be done pretty quickly. I'll refer to, say, if you need some more information about some of these, just refer to the right-of-way and utilities manual that VDOT has for complete requirements of acquisition and right-of-way. So here you can see the forms that are listed for submitting proposals based on the different projects or different categories under VDOT's program. And we'll talk about those in more detail. So you can see here's a link to the first form, and that's the HSIP proposal form. Sometimes that's referred to as the HSP program, which is where you compute your benefit cost analysis. We'll look at that in a little bit more detail. And that will really be the focus of today's discussion. The next form is the Bicycle and Pedestrian Safety Program form, which you can see is a link is provided on this page. The third form is the Highway Rail Grade Crossing Safety Program form. Again, the link on this page. And then the final one that is part of the program is the Systemic Improvement Proposal form. This is still development. It uses the risk methodology that I talked briefly about, where you're looking at what are the common risk factors in crashes that are dispersed through an area. And they could be also used on areas that could potentially be corridors as well. But the whole idea of the systemic process is you're linking the crash type to a risk factor that's being dispersed through an area, and linking that then to an improvement that would determine the benefit cost ratio for of the systemic approach. Implementation of the HSIP is based off of three primary categories: preliminary engineering, construction, and performance measurement. And as I mentioned very briefly, is that one of the requirements for before you go into preliminary engineering is that allocations be programmed through the STIP or the TIP. And all agreements with regard to preliminary engineering have to be executed. Federal authorization is provided for preliminary engineering, then work may begin. And then when preliminary engineering is done, construction can begin. And you can see here, just very briefly, is that scheduling and contract prepares construction bid documents as part of that process. And finally, performance measurement. There's two activities under performance measurement that are essential for HSIP implementation. That's monitoring the schedule of the projects and the cost to make sure that they're on schedule and that there's not cost overruns. So broadly, the HSP, Highway Safety Program, has again these primary objectives, and that's basically to identify approved locations where there is a high concentration or risk of vehicle crashes that result in deaths and injuries, and to implement strategies to attain Virginia's towards zero death vision. The program staff, the HSIP staff produce to meet those objectives. The staff produce high severe crash location lists annually, and are also employing another methodology that is based off the Highway Safety Manual, which employs an advanced screening network. So those are the two ways where projects are potentially identified. The ability of projects are, again, documented crashes, a risk that's assessed, and they have to be tied to the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, the SHSP emphasis areas. Because, again, the HSIP and SHSP are integrally linked. In projects as part of the program are basically bridge replacement, automated enforcement, and general maintenance activities. So, again, I briefly mentioned benefit cost analysis, and I know this is where there's a lot of questions, and the discussion kind of centers around this. So the benefit cost ratio is basically you're just comparing the benefits obtained from a project, and that's realized through the reduction of crashes, the costs. And the costs are, of course, the cost of implementing the suggested treatment that is going to address the issues that have been identified. So resulting BC analysis is used to assess eligibility of projects. So you need BC or a B ratio greater than 1 in order for a project to be eligible. If it's less than 1, basically what you're saying, your costs are outweighing your benefits. If it's greater than 1, your benefits outweigh your costs. So some of the inputs that are used in the BC analysis, one is you need at least the latest 3 years of crash history data that are available, and that has to be entered by type and severity, and we'll get into that in more details in a moment. The cost of each program improvement has to be entered too, and we're talking about the total life cycle cost, and you can see right under that bullet there, it shows all components that go into the life cycle costs, which are PE costs, construction, maintenance, etc. And we'll talk about that in more detail too. A thing too that is used in the analysis is the benefit of each improvement. And like I mentioned briefly, the benefits are derived from a reduction in crashes. So by reducing crashes, that is your benefit. And the benefit is calculated from using a factor called a crash modification factor, CMF. I'm sure everybody's familiar with that, but I'll just refer to the CMF clearinghouse, and you can see the website posted there is where the CMFs are obtained. There's over 4,000 CMFs at the website covering 100 treatments. So looking at that, you'll be able to enter the name of a treatment, for instance, rumble strips, and it'll produce a CMF, a crash modification factor that tells you how crashes would be affected by employing that treatment. So, one of the questions in the benefit and cost analysis, and we'll talk about this in more detail, but I'll just touch on it right now, is, when you're doing the analysis, if there's single or multiple improvements, how do you fill that out in the BC spreadsheet? Well, if there's only one single improvement, then it's easy because you fill out one BC spreadsheet. But if there's multiple spreadsheets, you kind of go through this little Q&A, this question and answer that provides you the risk of whether you do a single sheet or multiple sheets. So the first question that you ask is, do selected CMFs for each treatment apply to the same crash types and severities? If no, then you'd use multiple spreadsheets because you have different crash types and or severities and different treatments that address each of those individually. If then you'd go to the next question. So the question is, do the treatments target the same underlying safety issue? If then use multiple spreadsheets if there's more than 3 proposed treatments that support that same safety issue. So again, you might have to use multiple spreadsheets even when you have the same target issue that's being addressed. And we're going to go through an example that might clarify that a little bit better. So that's the overview of the benefit cost analysis spreadsheet. We're going to go through an example which hopefully maybe provides some more detail and clarification on some of those things if you have questions. Next form we'll go over just very briefly is the bicycle and pedestrian safety program form. And the purpose of that, of course, is to address non-motorized crashes and risks. Proposals must encompass the factors that are listed there, document the expected reduction in crashes, look at addressing the existing hazardous situations, can demonstrate that they will meet the necessary VDOT guidelines, and upgrade non-standard features to existing standards like ADA. This form, again, this is just a brief introduction to that, is to the purpose of the Highway Rail Grade Crossing Safety Program form is to reduce risk and number of crashes involving highway rail grade crossings. And again, this is a risk-based form, very similar to the bicycle and pedestrian form. And again, I invite you to look at that if you have a need to look at the VDOT website for more information. Final program is the local safety program. Local maintained roadways account for approximately 20% of Virginia's serious injuries and fatal crashes, and VDOT allocating about 20% of its annual HSIP appropriation for those projects. The allocation for fiscal year 2017 is anticipated to be in the order of about $10 million. So you see on this slide right here, this is basically shows you the process for the local agency safety program, and the process is a series of questions and responses that will tell you whether the program meets eligibility. The main things that this process takes you through is answering and making sure that projects are delivered on time, that there's proper oversight being conducted, and that performance criteria for the projects are being met. Criteria shown in the flow chart, again, meet those criteria. Then on this page and the second page, then you have a project that might be a good candidate for through the local agency safety program. So that's kind of a brief overview of some of the forms. Now what we're going to do is take a few minutes to go through an example of how you would fill out the benefit cost ratio form. These first few slides I'm going to step through very quickly because it's basically just some of the background information. You see here, you enter the agency information. You enter in the next part, you enter the project sponsor, who is requesting the project. The address and contact information are then entered. Priority of the project. If you're submitting multiple projects, you want to make sure that those are prioritized. So that the projects where you have the most benefit are the ones that are potentially take first. Location of the project is then entered. In this case, you see it's entered by milepost, the district, and the region. A general project description is entered, and what type. There's drop-down menus to identify what type of program, whether it's HSIP or if it's part of STARS or Accord of statewide significance. Roadway description, including functional class, the aeration, the system code, and whether it's primary or in traffic control are also things that are filled out through drop-down menus as well. The study period, it defines the study of the analysis for which the application is being submitted, and so make sure that is entered and accurate too with the rest of the information on the form. And then the specific information from the project too is entered as well. So getting to the part that is really how the benefit cost ratio is calculated. The first step is you start with the crash history. And you define history by type and severity. You see at the top of the table, you would enter crashes by severity. And what you have to do is next you enter because by crash type in category. Now, what's interesting is that since you're entering these manually, is that the number of crashes in the box that are circled above have to equal the number of crashes in the boxes circled below. This line is just an overall total crashes by severity. The box, the specific row are the breakdown by crash type. And then the second entry is the secondary crash categories have to also be entered. Once you have that first step, all of your crash information entered, then you enter your cost information. And as we alluded to earlier, there's comprehensive cost information that has to be entered through this. Costs down by phase, right-of-way and utilities and construction. And then cost and accurate cost estimates should utilize VDOT's project cost estimation system, CES worksheets. If you don't have access to those, you can get your own costs with specification in terms of how you're coming up with that cost information. Now we'll walk through very briefly a step-by-step of entering that cost information. So first you enter the PE cost of $5,000, so you're adding that $5,000 to it. And that's basically for the HSIP staff to administer and track the program. Then you enter right-of-way and utility costs, and then construction costs. So those are all separate entries. Then enter life and annual maintenance. And there are sheets that are included with the SIP application that provide information on those two entries there. All right, sorry. And then what's calculated there is the rest of the things, either like maintenance, or excuse me, there's a page missing here. Contingency and total cost is calculated based off of your entries to come up with a present value of the total cost for the treatments that you selected. So step 3 is calculate the benefit. And like we had discussed very briefly, is the benefit is looked at in terms of what are the types of treatments that you're deploying to address the issues. So you can see here that there's 3 proposed improvements potentially. That there's what you would do is look at the CMS clearinghouse for looking at to determine the CMS value, and the CMS values are provided by applicable crash type. So for instance, the first line, you have a CMS value of 0.23 for angle crashes, and it's applicable to all crash severity types. And then you have the option of whether or not to include in your analysis, and typically you would, and that's there more as an option to kind of toggle and look at ways that you can see how you can affect your final BC ratio by including that in analysis or not. And then the information moving to the right side of the screen is reference information in terms of where you obtained the CMF, and then other notes that might be applicable for your project. So again, we talked about this very briefly, is you might have to fill out various sheets for calculating their benefit cost ratio. So let's go through an example right now. So the example is that there's multiple treatments for a single location, including a 4-foot paved shoulders, or 4-foot paved shoulders, and then installation of a shoulder rumble strip. So there's 2 treatments. So there's multiple treatments for the same location. So the first thing you ask is, do the selected treatment CMS for each treatment apply to the same crash types and severities? So the answer is yes. We can assume that both the CMFs apply to all crash types and severities. So you would go to the next question. Do the treatments target the same underlying safety issue? They do. Paved shoulders and shoulder rumble strips both help address run-off-the-road crashes. And since only 2 proposed treatments, a single spreadsheet can be used, recognizing that the BC ratio will be slightly inflated because it's going to take those 2 BC ratios from those treatments together. But ultimately, your final BC benefit cost will not only be inflated, but that's what you would use in your application. So here again, pointing out the different things, I talked about those, is you're entering these, all the items from the CMF clearinghouse. The CMF value, which is in that column to the left, applicable crash type, applicable severity type, which is specified on the CMF clearinghouse website, and then you get to decide whether or not you think it should be included in the final analysis. And the last 2 columns are reference information. Now, repeating the benefit cost ratio, you see this is how it all kind of comes together. You decide whether or not the specific treatments you have for the proposed improvement would be included in the final analysis. Again, part of that is having the ability to toggle yes or no to see what the final BC ratio is, which you can see is circled kind of in the middle of the screen. And I did mention that final note too. There is that there is a $5,000 added to PE costs for processing the HSIP applications. That's how what is initially submitted. After a project is approved and is included in the STIP, they provide this additional information that helps with project schedule. Again, I'll just refer to, in the interest of time, I'll just refer to the manual for some of those requirements and the submission information. But just note that is something, once a project is approved, has to be filled out as well. So some requirements are: you must use the latest HSP form, which is up on the website, which was shown, or Systemic Safety Improvement Proposal form, which is still in development. Must be received by VDOT's Traffic Engineering Office by November 1st. They must be named in the nomenclature or using the file naming scheme that's shown there. And must both be submitted as an electronic copy and a design copy and delivered to those two locations. Through, if it's the electronic copy is delivered to the the email that's there, and then the hard copy is delivered to the HSP improvement address. So, when you're submitting your proposal, you just check through those items, making sure that you're using each of them for your application to be properly submitted. So, again, that's a pretty quick run through some of these things, how you would submit the application. Now, I think we would like to open it up to questions.
Like Dan said, now we'll open up the questions from the audience. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to chime in at this point or type them into the chat box so that we can address those questions as they come forward.
Okay.
I have a question. We're sending out a paper copy of this presentation.
We'll post this on our external website as well as outside VDOT page for those who have access to it. But yes, we'll also record this webinar, and it will be posted on the VDOT's external web page on the traffic engineering site.
Does the November 1st deadline supersede previous September 1st date?
The December 1st date will do for local administrative safety projects to be submitted to the VDOT district office. The November 1st date has always been a hard pass date for all applications to be into the central office traffic engineering division for us to start our review process. Yeah, the district to submit them into the central office.
Who from the district will sign the form?
District forms, as in past, will have to have their DA signature on their priority list for the projects to come into the central office, knowing that they've been vetted through that district office and they've met the approval and the district strategic safety plan purpose. So we require that the DA for each district sign off on the proposal before they submit them into the central office.
And we have another question here about the BC spreadsheet. There's a question is basically there's an area that has a 2-mile seg roadway with one of the highest crash rates in the state due to tightly spaced median crossovers with poor geometry. After looking at data, they're looking at a variety of improvements at 9 locations over the 2-mile segment of roadway, which includes closure of 4 median crossovers, installation of 1 new median crossover, conversion of 4 full movement median crossovers to a limited median crossover, and the installation of a single right pork chop island and an intersection where the main segment intersects with a side street. So the question is, will only one spreadsheet be necessary, and will they be able to do a spreadsheet for the entire quarter? And I think the response to this is yes, that you would be able to, since you're looking at the quarter as a whole system, and the crashes are really related to access and crossover, so that's kind of the same type of treatment that you're looking at.
All right, thanks, Dan. I have a question. How does the HSIP application account for improvements that address crashes along only one approach of an intersection? Okay. When we do HSIP improvement, we're looking at improving the whole intersection. So if there's only crashes along one approach, we will crashes on that approach. But when we do HSIP project, we're looking at improving the whole flow of the intersection. So we will address all crashes at the intersection. More questions? You're awfully quiet out the first form, so feel free to chime in.
If anybody wants to ask a question over the phone, just hit #6.
Can localities still submit for a new project under the HFP 10 million if they do not want to administer the project? Local administered projects, they have option of working with that VDOT district or traffic or resident administrator to determine if that would want to volunteer to administer those projects for them. So just because localities submit a project does not necessarily mean or does not require them to be the administrator of those safety projects. That was something that we encouraged, that they work with the RA, the resident administrator or resident engineer, and with the locality to work out the details of that. Basically, it doesn't matter to the central VDOT one way or the other if the county administered the project or if VDOT administered the project for them. I have a question. Is anyone considering systemic projects this year? We didn't talk a lot about that, so if you have questions about that, Dan and I'll be happy to address those for you guys. Okay, I have a question. Why does the HSIP application account for deer-type crashes? You address that?
Why doesn't it account?
So why does it account for deer?
Where?
Yeah.
Well, an interesting question. This has come up a few times, and I think the challenge of that is that fill out the application, it has to go back to what are the benefits you can show, and the benefits are tied to CMS. And this clearinghouse really doesn't have a lot of really good, robust CMS for reducing deer-type crashes. So I would encourage you to explore that to see, if there is something that you might be able to find that's of benefit. But I know that, agencies have struggled with that because there's not a lot of really, measures with a real, big benefit showing how you can reduce that type of crash.
Okay. And get to the systemic approach. Could you talk a little bit about the systemic approach? What type of information that would fit going into systemic type of application proposal form?
Sure. So, with the systemic approach, again, it's a little bit different philosophy in that you're not looking at where crashes are concentrated, but you're looking at where there's risk factors that are repeated and seen through crashes. So I'll try to explain like a pedestrian crash, for instance. You could have, we all know that pedestrian crashes are random, and there's really hard to, which is a thankful thing, right? So it's difficult maybe to in a pattern. You would look at, like, if there's a pedestrian type crash, you would maybe look at that from some sort of systemic application potentially, because you're looking at, okay, so there's a vehicle pedestrian type crash along a corridor, but you're looking at addressing that not at specifically where the random type crash, but you're looking at addressing it on the entire corridor. So you might look at some sort of signage or putting up warning signs or something with regard to that look at addressing it not at just a specific location where you had a crash, but along a corridor where there's still that potential for a crash to occur. And, air crashes too are one of those things that are very, very random too. We don't have countermeasures, but anything that seems that is a more dispersed crash that's not concentrated in a particular hot spot or intersection, are those types of things that are good candidates for a systemic type of approach, because you see a common risk factor along a corridor or within a location, rather than looking at a specific crash type in a spot location, because you could address that treatment in a specific location if you're looking at a systemic crash, but that similar crash pop up in other locations because the risk factors are still present.
Just to get back on, I know FHWA has encouraged us with systemic improvements, though, is that if there's an on-B over C ratio for those type of improvements, then, they're asking us to apply those where applicable, but they recognize that systemic improvements are dispersed over a large area, and you may not have a BC for each type of countermeasure improvement that you want to implement. So it's a combination of both, I think, that we probably receive on the systemic type of proposals that we receive.
Yes, I agree with that.
Thanks. Another thing came up is approximately how much money is available for this round of applications. That'd be a call for projects every year. Okay. The answer to that is that currently we're holding steady with a rough estimate of about $50 million a year of HSIP applications from FHWA. Okay, so funding has been consistent for that number of years. We're anticipating the same amount of funding, not getting reduced this year. Next year it may be reduced depending on the new transportation bill, if and when that be signed. Okay, so we're actually basing this year's program off the figures that we've had for the last couple of years in the HSIP program. And yeah, we'll be a call for projects every year. Our goal is to pass a 6-year program out with enough safety projects that when the funding becomes available, that projects ready to go without having to find projects to the HSIP program. So our goal is to get a full 6-year set of HSIP projects, and the ones that we weren't able to fund this year due to either financial restraints or ability criteria, as we move forward through the program, we have this back of safety projects on the shelf that we can deliver every year. Another question we have is, where can we find the district priority list of intersections segments on VDOT website? Okay, currently that list resides in the outside VDOT webpage, which is a literally new tool that the traffic engineering division here at the central office has been utilized. We're required to have a ID and a user log on to get into this outside VDOT. So if you have any questions about getting access to this, please feel free to contact myself or Mr. Mark Cole in the central office to ask for information, directions on how to access this VDOT outside webpage. And that is where we have our 100 or our top 100 intersections or 100 miles of segment for each VDOT district. We have our PSI for potential safety improvement locations, and this is where the information will be located and housed at.
Did you want to put contact information in the chat box there for everyone?
Okay. Sure.
A quick question. This is Steve.
Okay.
And I think I mentioned earlier the question about the September 1st date and the November 1st date. So the info provided is certainly helpful, but the question I have is, are additional applications allowed to be submitted to the districts since the original guide is that the localities had to submit by September 1st to the districts?
Okay, so that's a good question. And what we've been doing, because this has been such a short turnaround time frame, is that we're leaving it up to each district to determine their workload and what they feel comfortable and enough time to review the proposals from the locality. The September 1st deadline was given to us by the district as a time frame that they felt comfortable with receiving the applications and having time to review it and give it back to the localities for them to make changes and comments. But like I said, again, I've gotten requests from different districts that where, we have a problem extending the deadline if you don't have a problem extending the deadline. So we felt that would be a call best made by the districts and with our localities and how you guys feel like you can work with them on that. The deadline that we really have set as here is the November 1st deadline, where all applications from the district and it has to be turned into the Central Office Traffic Engineering Division by then.
Okay, we would have to work with our district or regional traffic engineering office then.
Right. Yes.
That's their priority.
Prioritize. Like I said, again, we felt that that was beyond our scope to mandate your timeline with that, so we felt we were a better judge at the time than we were.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome. Other question. Will the application submitted this fall be funded in out years, or is it possible for a project to move forward within the next year or so? Actually, both. It's possible that the project a project could move forward this year or so. It depends on the schedule and the funding available. But like I said, one of our goals were to program projects in out years and moving forward to complete a 6-year program. Depending on the availability of the funding and the urgency of the project, we have to fund that project in outer years because technically we try to program at least up to 6 years of good solid safety projects in the program. Sometimes we have a good, I have as much just a program up to maybe 4 years of the 6-year program. So it really does depend on the availability of the funds, the urgency of the project, and the critical need of the project, and the priority of the district or region that submit those applications into us. Our PSI locations same as those in VTrans. Actually, yes and no. And the reason why I say yes and no, that the concept of the PSIs in VTrans were developed for the safety program, but VTrans, we update our PSI locations every year. So, eventually there'll be the same listing, but at this time there still may be some discrepancy between the two lists. We have about maybe another 5 or 6 minutes left on the so this is your opportunity to ask us questions about the form or anything of the program that you would like to address at this time. Feel free to come to ask Dan and myself. I have Mr. Cole, Marco, and Deepak Karola here with me as well with Todd to answer any questions that we could. So feel free to ask us if you have any. If not, this webinar has been helpful to you guys, and I've put email contact and phone number out there in the chat box, so feel free to contact me later on if you have any additional questions or any concerns about the HIP applications or forms and schedules. And like I said, I appreciate your time and your attention this afternoon. Okay. Great. I got one question. are PDs eligible to apply? Yes. Okay. HSIP proposed funds are eligible for all public roads in Virginia. Yeah, but if they're locally maintained, then that falls under the local administered projects that need to be submitted through the department. Right. Anything else you want to add before we sign off? Or
No, we covered some things. Again, just I think the systemic is one of those things that is hopefully some projects of that, and that's going to be a little bit different tool than what the benefit costs form is. Still similar process, but again, looking at that for risk factor that's more dispersed rather than spot locations or even corridors.
right. I have one last question. Are PE signed seal reports needed for any application type? With any engineering study analysis, a PE signed seal is required with any PE study or documentation to support the HSIP application. Remember, it's covered in form. The form does not need to be signed and sealed. But any study or documentation that goes along to show justification or cost for this engineering project will have to have a signed and seal stamp with it. Okay. I guess hearing no further questions, we're going to sign up. Form sufficient without report. Okay. You still need to have a engineering study or engineering document to support your form that you submit. So we need support documentation with every form that you submit for the HSIP project.
Okay. Thank you very much, you guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your time and attention, and have a great afternoon.
Bye-bye.
We're signing off.